Look at this farm outside the village of Gruber in Bavaria, Germany. Hinterkaifeck, an isolated farmstead, fields on one side, forest on the other, no close neighbors, no streetlights, nothing but distance between this house and the next sign of another human being. On the evening of March 30th, 1922, the farm's owner, Andreas Gruber, stepped outside and found something in the snow that he could not explain. Footprints, leading from the tree line across the field straight to his farmhouse. He followed them. They led all the way to the door of his own home. He checked for a second set of tracks leading back out, away from the house, into the woods where they had come from. There were none. Whoever had walked to this farm had not walked away from it. Gruber searched the barn that night. He found nothing. No one hiding, no signs of an intruder, nothing out of place. He went back inside and, by his own account, tried to put it out of his mind. But something in the house had already changed. That night, lying in bed, he heard footsteps above him, in the attic, a space that, as far as he knew, was empty. This was not the first strange thing to happen at Hinterkaifeck that year, and it would not be the last. But it may be the moment the case turns from an isolated crime into something closer to a slow, quiet invasion. To understand what the footprints meant, you have to understand the shape of the house. The living quarters were attached to the barn, which was attached to a machine room, all connected in an L shape. One continuous structure a person could move through without stepping outside. If someone got into the machine room, they could reach the barn. If they could reach the barn, they were one door away from the family. That matters because Hinterkaifeck was not a house separated from its outbuildings. It was one connected system. Living rooms, barn, machine room, attic space, roof line. A person hidden inside one part of it would not need to cross an open yard to move through the farm. They could remain under the same roof line, close enough to hear the household below, while still staying out of sight. The Gruber household was not a simple one. Andreas, 63 years old, lived there with his wife, Cecilia, their widowed daughter, Victoria, and Victoria's two children, 7-year-old Cecilia and 2-year-old Joseph. A maid completed the household. This was not the maid's first day working for the family. It was, in fact, someone new, hired that very week because the previous maid had quit 6 months earlier and refused to come back. She quit because of the attic. For weeks before she left, she told the Grubers she heard footsteps above her at night, voices she could not place, sounds that had no source anyone could locate. She said her locked chamber door would swing open at midnight on its own more than once. The family searched the attic each time. They found nothing. Eventually, she said she could not stay in a house that behaved like this, and she left. The Grubers, by most accounts, treated it the way most people treat a story like that, as nerves, as something to be politely dismissed. Then, months later, the family began hearing it too. Around the same period Andreas found the footprints in the snow, he also noticed a key to the house had gone missing, one he never found. He discovered a newspaper on the property that belonged to no one in the family, a Munich publication nobody could account for, and the mailman insisted he had never delivered. He found scratch marks around the lock of the tool shed, the same shed where the household kept its pickaxe, as though someone had tried and perhaps eventually succeeded in getting inside. None of these details, taken alone, prove very much. A misplaced key is nothing. A stray newspaper blown in from the road is nothing. Scratches on an old lock could be years old. But taken together, in the same narrow window of time, in a family that already believed something in that attic was listening to them, they form a pattern that is difficult to look at as coincidence. Here's the question this case keeps circling, and it is a very different question from who did this. The question is, was someone already inside the house before the murders happened? Investigators, looking at the farm's layout afterward, found something that made this theory more than speculation. Above the machine room, connected to the barn, there was a small attic space accessible by a rope, with straw pressed down in a shape consistent with someone having lain there for an extended period. Roof tiles nearby had been shifted in a position that would have given anyone up there a clear line of sight across the entire farmyard. A person hidden in that space could see who came and went, could hear conversations below, could wait. If that is what happened, then the footsteps the maid heard were not a haunting. They were someone moving, The voices were not spirits. They were a person or people shifting position above a family who had no idea they were being watched from the moment they walked out to feed the animals in the morning to the moment they went to bed at night. The house did not need to be haunted for it to feel the way the family described it. It only needed to already have someone else living inside it. On the night of March 31st, 1922, that presence, whatever it was, stopped watching and started acting. The family was drawn, one at a time, into the barn. The arrangement of the bodies has led many accounts of the case to suggest they were drawn into the barn one at a time, each family member walking into the same space where the last one had just been killed, with no chance to warn the others. Andreas, Cecilia, Victoria, her 7-year-old daughter, Cecilia. All four were found later, stacked on top of each other beneath a pile of hay, in what investigators believe was the order in which they died. Whoever did this then moved into the house itself. 2-year-old Joseph was killed in his crib. The new maid, on her very first day working at the farm, was killed in her bed. She likely had no idea, walking into this job that morning, that the strange things her predecessor described were not a reason to be relieved she'd never experienced them herself, but a warning about exactly what she was walking into. All 6 were killed with a farm tool taken from that same tool shed with the scratched lock. Every victim was struck multiple times in the head. What happened after this is, in some ways, the most disturbing part of the entire case, more than the killings themselves. Whoever committed this crime did not leave. In the days that followed, the farm did not look abandoned. Neighbors passing by saw smoke rising from the chimney, the kind of smoke that comes from an active fire being tended, not one left to burn out on its own. The family dog was seen tied up outside, not wandering loose the way it would be if the house were simply empty. On the following Saturday, a mail carrier came through and noticed nothing alarming enough to investigate further. Meals had apparently continued to be prepared in the kitchen. The animals in the barn, stepping over or around the bodies of the family that had once fed them, continued to be looked after. Someone was living in that house among the dead for what appears to have been several days, doing the ordinary tasks of a farm the way the family themselves would have done them, until the bodies were finally discovered. The Gruber's daughter, young Cecilia, had not shown up to school. A neighbor's growing unease about the lack of activity on the farm eventually led to the door being forced open. What was found inside, and in the barn beside it, brought police from Munich out to a case that would occupy them, on and off, for the better part of a decade. Over 100 separate investigative efforts were made into these murders in the years that followed. None of them produced a conviction. There was one man investigators focused on more than any other, a neighbor named Lorenz Schlittenbauer, who had been the one to organize the search of the farm after days of silence, and who was the one to first find the bodies in the barn. His history with the family was complicated. He had been involved with Victoria years earlier. There were also allegations of incest within the household, and questions over Joseph's paternity became part of the suspicion surrounding the family. Schlittenbauer knew details about the crime scene that made investigators suspicious he had information he should not have had, but he also had a plausible, if unsettling, explanation for that closeness. His son had lived and worked on the farm, and he himself had spent enough time there over the years that intimate knowledge of the household was not on its own proof of guilt. A second name surfaces in some accounts, a local man who had once wanted to marry an earlier maid at the farm and been turned away partly on the family's advice, and who was reported to have said the family deserved to be killed. But nothing is tying him concretely to that night, and the long gap between his grievance and the murders makes the theory difficult to sustain on its own. Neither man was ever charged. No one ever was. What we know, 6 people were killed at Hinterkaifeck on the night of March 31st, 1922. The bodies were discovered days later. The killer was never convicted. What was reported? Before the murders, the family and a former maid described footsteps, unexplained noises, a missing key, a strange newspaper, and footprints in the snow leading toward the house, but not away from it. What is still unsolved, whether those signs were coincidence, fear, or evidence that someone had already entered the farm and was hiding there before the murders. What remains, more than a century later, is not a solved case, and this episode is not going to pretend otherwise. What remains is a set of details that only make sense together. A family that believed, for months, their house was haunted. Footsteps with no visible source. A locked door opening on its own at midnight. A stranger's newspaper on their property. A missing key. Scratches on the shed that held the murder weapon. Footprints that arrived and never left. And finally, an attic space above the machine room with a place someone could lie down and a line of sight over the entire yard. None of it, individually, is supernatural. All of it, together, points toward a much colder possibility than a ghost. That in the weeks before 6 people died at Hinterkaifeck, someone had already found a way inside their home, had already found a place to watch them from, and had simply been waiting for the right night to stop watching. The family thought something was wrong with the house. What the evidence suggests is worse. Someone may have already been living inside it.